I've been given a kind of topic, which I don't mean to criticize anybody. I agreed on the topic. And what I'm supposed to be talking to you about this evening is the moral, which one can also read social, responsibility of the artist. Now this is, once one begins to think about it, so loaded a theme, so loaded a subject, that no one can hope to do it justice. And all that I can hope to do this evening is to speculate with you and then have you speculate with me. I will try to ask you some questions, and then you will try to ask me some questions, and then we'll see what happens. Now, the trouble with such things as the moral responsibility of the artist, which is a very grandiose way of putting it, is that in order to begin to deal with such a subject at all, one's got to begin by being extremely reckless and extremely simple-minded. For example, before we can begin to discuss it, one's got to arrive at some kind of tentative agreement as to what or who an artist is. And that would seem a very simple matter if it were not for two facts, which I suggest to you. At least two facts. And especially in this country and at this time. One is that one has got to disengage the artistic effort. One has got to separate it from what is normally thought of in this country, and perhaps in the world, when we speak of self-expression. And to give you some idea of how loaded the subject is, the very conjunction of the two words self-expression opens up a tremendous wilderness. Who is this self, and what is it expressing? But to stick to my point, the artistic effort is first of all defined by the necessity, by the discipline is that one has got to become disinterested. That is to say, I may have excellent reasons, private, emotional terrors. For some reason, I may not want to think that this is wood. But in order to become an artist, I got to say that this is wood, even if it threatens my life, and even if I know it will destroy me. Now the reason, we're going to come back to that in a minute, this effort at being disinterested, which is the bone of the artistic discipline. But the second reason is in some ways even more important, and is certainly connected to the first reason, which is the fact. Now bear in mind when I say fact, that for example, this is a fact, I am a fact, all of you are collective and individual facts, and the city in which we stand and the country in which we find ourselves are facts, like rain, like thunder, like lightning, like fire. The fact of the artist has always attacked, and it attacks now. And as far as we can tell, it probably always will attack all of our notions of safety and all of our notions of health. Now speaking, if I may, for a moment, simply as an artist who tries to work with words, any literary artist soon realizes that all words are at least double-edged. There is, for example, such a thing as health, and there really is such a thing as health. But there is also such a thing as what society thinks of as health, which is not the same thing. Now, when you are trying to suggest, for example, what health is, you are forced to attack all the assumptions of your society, because it imagines health to be collective, whereas the artist is forced to recognize and is obliged to make you know that health is single, individual, and uncertain. There's never a moment in anybody's life when the job is, as it were, done. You may make it on Tuesday, but you still got Wednesday morning to face. Now, the reason that traditionally, this is according to me, presently, as I said, you'll have a chance at, you can attack me. But legend is full of legends, of stories about the dreamy poet, the mad lover, the poet, the lunatic, and the lover. Marvelous conjunction. Traditionally and classically, the artist is always possessed. Traditionally and classically, he has always been stoned, and there are many ways of stoning an artist to death, by the people who produced him because they needed him. Now, what was he possessed by? This is where we get into the extraordinary marshy ground of who and what an artist is. Now, according to me, what an artist is, who an artist is simply somebody who helps you see reality again. The pressures of everyone's life, including, if I may say so, those of the artist, are so great that one has, in self-defense, in order to survive, in order to get through one single day, to learn certain habits, to take certain things for granted, with the effect, inevitably, that by and by, you don't see anything. Now let me repeat that. I've had to assume, for example, I have to take for granted that this platform will not fall down beneath me. I must take that for granted. I assume that this building is built strongly enough that the ceiling won't fall down on me. Now, these are assumptions which may or may not be justified. But I must make these assumptions in order to move at all. On the other hand, in order to keep alive, in order to become a human being really, one has got to question everything. Let me try to give you an example of what I mean. Apples are very common. When a writer tries to describe an apple, nothing would seem simpler than to say an apple's red, for example. But then you realize that the word apple has certain emotional, historical, classical connotations. It is somehow involved with evil, Eve in the garden. It is a fact, it grows on a tree, it falls. And how do you make an apple real on a page? How do I make you see what an apple is? Or, for example, another example. We've all, I suppose, in one way or another, had occasion to deal with a newborn child. And legend is full of the miracle of motherhood and fatherhood. And indeed it is a miracle when a child comes into the world. But it's a miracle very little respected. Finally, that moment of wonder, which is precisely what we all depend on when the child is born, is what we endlessly betray in the raising of the child. So again, one has to make real. The artist has to make real for himself and everyone else. The fact of the birth of a child is holy, and we are responsible to that moment, which is one of the summits of everybody's life. Now, the vision by which an artist is possessed, and here we can use the word possessed, I think, legitimately, because no one in his right mind, I assure you, would want to be a writer. I never understood people who say they would like to be writers. I discovered that I was one, and I'm still trying to make it. He is possessed, the artist is possessed by a vision which is precisely this, nothing less than this. It is the vision of the New Jerusalem. It is the vision of the kingdom of heaven on earth. And where the war begins between the artist and his society is precisely here. It is only the artist, as distinguished from the priest, the psychoanalyst, the pope. It is only the artist who is really, you can check me out, I hope, given us any sense of what it is like to be alive, to be trapped, and to glory in this fact that one is forever, or for a very short time, I mean both things at once, between that sky and this earth, and you came from someplace, and you're going someplace else, you don't know where you're going, and you don't know where you came from, and what it feels like to be here and to triumph in it. The artist has given us his record. And the war is a very strange war when you begin to realize that the reason the artist is possessed by the vision of the New Jerusalem is not at all because he is a dreamer, and not at all because he's unrealistic. His vision is based on what he has seen of human beings, what one sees of them, what one sees of another, proves that people can be better than they are. This is all any artist has ever been trying to say. And the collision occurs because people would like to be better than they are, but don't wish to see themselves revealed, and don't wish to have their deepest intimations, their deepest suspicions concerning what they could be and what they could do. They do not wish to have these suspicions confirmed because the effort is mighty. One of the reasons that we have invented God is simply on the most basic and also the most base and the most tribal level to justify our failures. God expands as we expand. I don't think I have to spell out to any of you the fearful crimes which have been committed and are being committed all over the world and in this country as we stand here in the name of God. Now the artist, no matter how he sounds, is by definition a religious man, believing that we can create and transcend all our gods. That it is entirely up to us, it is the work of human beings, to make the world more human. This is the demand that the artist makes of his society, which the society inevitably, unfailingly, and always resists. Resists because it knows that it could do it, but prefers to believe that what it can see and touch is more real than what it knows and feels at that moment, for example, when the baby is born. The role of the artist, the responsibility of the artist, is to make you respect that moment above all other moments. To recognize that there is nothing under heaven, nothing under heaven, no creed and no flag and no cause more important than the single human life. Now, perhaps I should try to spell it out a little bit more. I don't want to sound in any way too general. But for example, and I'm sure this has happened to everyone in this room in one way or another, I'm a street boy, and I've known some terrible, terrible people. You know, racketeers, whores, gangsters, and people much worse than that, and so have you. And yet, in all these people, and it wasn't always easy to reach. Sometimes it was impossible to reach. Sometimes when we recognized it negatively, because the cat or the chick cursed you out in a certain way. In all these people, if one struck a certain nerve, a certain moment, something happened. And what happened, for a moment, was that they realized, they accepted, and they rejoiced in the fact that they were human and that they were alive. We've all seen this. It is one of the reasons that no one has the right to stand in moral judgment on the life of another, because you don't know what you would have done if you'd gone that road. This is a very important matter in this country now, especially in this country now. Because we have been, it seems to me, for so many generations, so misled and even so maligned. For example, it has simply never been true that the country was settled by heroes and martyrs. That simply is not true. It has never been true that we were a happy people. In San Francisco, where I was the other day, where they have thousands of successful people who have the highest suicide rate in the world. What is true is that, in fact, the country was settled as all things are done, as all human things are achieved, you know, awkwardly, with pain, with sweat, and with vast injustice, by a handful of people from Europe who had reasons of their own for leaving Europe. And the reason for leaving Europe was not because they wanted to be free. They had other reasons. And this sounds, I suppose, very hostile. But something awful happens to a people if they make of their history a myth. The Irish came here, for example, because they were starving. That's why. There may be one or two Irishmen, or three or four Irishmen, or whatever, came for some other more noble reason. But in fact, the country was settled by people who had excellent reasons for living where they were. And where they were was worse than where they found themselves. And when they closed the door on the European past, this is part of the American drama now, they thought they had buried the past. It is why, until today, no American dares look back. The only people who came here for other reasons, who didn't want to come here at all, never dreamed of it, were my ancestors. Now, the weird paradox is this, and I'm still trying to give you some sense, or my sense anyway, of what the moral responsibility of an artist is. It isn't so much, that here we came, I mean the Europeans, the people from heaven. That's what the Indians called them the first time they saw them, and how right they were. The people from heaven came here and killed off the Indians. And they killed off the Indians in very dishonorable ways. By treachery, by lies, by murder. But I'm not complaining, for example, about that. I am complaining about the fact that one pretends it didn't happen. And we have endless TV shows, as far as I can tell, 7 nights a week to prove it didn't happen. That's the crime. If you don't know where you came from, then you don't know where you are, and you can't find out where you're going. The second thing these freedom-loving people did was enslave the black man because they needed cheap labor. Well, okay. People have been doing that for centuries, too. But as far as I can judge from what I read and what I see, this never happened either. Negroes liked it. Until today, until this moment, and I'm not kidding, part of the crisis in the liberal conscience is that somewhere he always assumed that you were grateful for being rescued from Africa and being brought at the point of a rifle to the foot of the cross. Now, what I'm after, you see, since I'm trying now to speak as an artist, I'm compelled, I must know, if I'm going to write a sentence, delusion from something resembling truth. If I had ever accepted the American version of American history, I would be at the bottom of a river. There'd be no other place for me to go. And as long as Americans accept this peculiar version of American history, they are uneasy and lost and lonely in the world. One of the terrible facts of the national life, by which I mean the private life, something, for example, Mr. Faulkner knew. I'm convinced one of the things that killed him is that if the American white man, cannot make friends with me, If the American white man pretends that he's not also my brother and my sister and my ancestor, unless he is willing to accept his only real connection, repeat, his only real connection, he will always be the loneliest man on earth. The Europeans do not understand Americans at all. At all. The only people in the world who do, the only people in the world who understand Americans are what we like to refer to as a darker brother. That's me. And I understand you because I've had to watch you, outwit you. I changed your diapers. I served your brandy. I've known what you were frightened of when you called me nigger. I had to know it if I were going to live. Speaking again, as a man who tries to work with words, and principally as a novelist. When you're at the typewriter and you're trying to create, to make alive, to make vivid a character, the most terrible thing you have to do, the first most terrible thing, is to accept the fact that in some peculiar way this character, whom you may or may not admire, you probably don't admire, came floating up out of you. And this creation testifies to something about you. And your responsibility as a man and as an artist is to face the fact that what you invent says more about you than it can possibly say about anything else. Your responsibility as an artist and as a man is to come as close as possible, and the gap is always irreducible, to close the gap between what you see and what there is, which is where we come to the principle again of being disinterested. So that if this were the guillotine and I know that I knew that I was about to perish on it, I would be under the obligation to say, this is the guillotine. But it won't cease being the guillotine if I say it isn't. Now the people who invented the nigger and who are still wrestling with the nigger and who have arrived at a moral chaos so sinister that in this country, in 1963, we can still see dogs turned on children, hoses turned on children. This is a lapse from reality, which could lead us where it led Germany. I want to repeat that. There is such a thing. If you abdicate from your responsibilities as a human being, and your responsibility as a human being is to treat other people as human beings. If you abdicate from that, there is no end to the labyrinth and the abyss in which you can find yourself. When you are at the typewriter creating somebody, you got to realize, no matter what crimes he committed, that it could be you. And in order to make it vivid, you have to try to examine those motives in yourself of which you are most ashamed and most terrified. Because otherwise, you will not create a character, you will create a point of view. And that is not what fiction is for. What Dostoevsky, for example, was trying to do in The Possessed, which is a novel laid in a very small provincial Russian town, not a very long time ago, what he was trying to do was terrify the people who read the book into realizing the spiritual state of Russia. Of course, in order to do it, he became, as we like to put it, extremely unhealthy. But as it turned out, he was entirely right. What one is trying to do now here is suggest to the American people that there is no reason whatever to be ashamed of the past, and no way whatever in any case to escape it. A field of paradox has happened in this country which no one seems to have noticed. And the paradox, to put it to you this way, is that I, or Duke Ellington, or Ray Charles, or Mahalia Jackson, or my nephew, are far more European than any American white man. And the reason that this is so is simply because black men in this country know what poets since Homer have known, that life is tragic. Life is tragic because the sun rises and the sun sets. The world turns. Everything changes. If you're not prepared to lose everything, then you never will have anything. This is what is meant when somebody sings the blues. It means you can't hold it, but it's nice to have it for the time you've got it. It's nice to know it's there, even when it isn't yours anymore, because it never is yours. It's life. Conrad said, "Woe to the man who puts not his trust in life." The Negro in this country represents that level of experience which we find in Oedipus Rex, and which Americans thought they had escaped when they crossed the ocean. And their attempt to escape it, we have become very dangerously adolescent. I'll try to spell that out. For example, there is to my mind something insane in the entire Cuban fiasco. To my mind, there's something insane in not knowing that a Cuban peasant might prefer to just be a Cuban peasant without the aid of the Americans, without working for nobody, working for himself. One hasn't got to know more than that. There's a country called Cuba, it's an island, and the man who lives on it calls himself a Cuban, and it was inevitable that sooner or later he would drive us out. What's sinister about that is that we pretend the Kremlin did it. What's sinister about that is that I, speaking now in my own person, think I have some sense of how the Cuban peasant must have felt, because I know how I feel And I can't think of any reason why I would go down to Cuba to shoot Cubans when we can't make a truce in Birmingham. The country which calls itself the moral leader of the free world will really have to become so. The great hangover here is the doctrine of white supremacy. And that's gotten tangled up in the American viscera with all kinds of other things. There's a terrible connection, for example, between that hangover and all those ghastly movies of Doris Day proving that love lasts forever and never hurt a soul. Any Negro you've ever seen in your life, still on 2 feet, knows better than that. Now, if we can establish this wedding, or rather, if we can legalize this child, we can begin to grow up. If we can't manage to accept what we have done and what we are doing, we're going to destroy our children, and that is the destruction of the country. The values that we live by are not real values. The real values are when a kid trusts you, for example. That's a real value. That means something. You can go a long way on that. But to be a young exec is not a real value. A country which pretends that it is possible to get to be 70 and still be innocent is in great danger. And we elected a boy of 70, not once, but twice. Well, there's a line from Nietzsche I'd like to leave with you. It describes my situation at the moment. I think it describes our situation at the moment. And thus spake Zarathustra. Nietzsche said, I may be not word for word right. This is what he said. He said, I stand before my highest mountain and before my longest journey, and therefore must I descend deeper than I have ever before descended. That is where we are. What we must descend into is a sea of human experience. We must cease trying to be a collection of virgins and try to bob up into the great light of human responsibility. We did not escape anything when we left Europe. We conquered a continent, and we've yet to make it a country.